The morning rush at Kepler Station's Central Market was always loud and crowded. Hundreds of different alien species moved through the wide aisles, their various sounds mixing into a constant buzz of noise. The air smelled like a mix of strange spices, metal, and the recycled atmosphere that all space stations shared. Margaret Sullivan walked slowly through the market, her old hands gripping a small cart filled with her weekly groceries. At 73 years old, she had lived on Kepler Station for almost 20 years, ever since her husband died and she could no longer afford their home on Earth. The station wasn't home, but it was safe and cheap enough for her small pension. She moved past tall blue-skinned Veltar merchants who clicked their long fingers as they counted money. Giant Kronak warriors stomped by in their heavy boots, making the floor shake. Small gray Pixians floated past her head, their wings making soft humming sounds. Margaret had gotten used to being one of the few humans in this part of the station. Her cart held simple things: bread, some canned vegetables, a small piece of meat that would last her 3 days if she was careful. Everything cost more than it used to, but she made do. At the bottom of her purse, wrapped carefully in a soft cloth, were her coins. Real metal coins from Earth, each one heavy and warm to the touch. Most people use credit chips now, small plastic cards that held their money digitally. But Margaret's husband Ben had given her these coins before he died. He had earned each one working in the dangerous asteroid mines, pulling rare metals from floating rocks in space. Every coin represented hours of his life, his sweat, his dedication to taking care of her. The checkout area had 5 stations, each run by a different species. Margaret chose the shortest line, not noticing that it was run by Zixith, a young Veltar who was known for being rude to customers. Behind the counter, his blue skin seemed to glow under the harsh station lights, and his 4 arms moved quickly as he scanned items. As Margaret waited, she noticed the person behind her in line. He was human, probably in his 50s, with dark hair that was starting to show gray at the edges. He wore simple clothes, a black jacket and dark pants, and he stood quietly while looking around the market with calm, dark eyes. Something about him seemed familiar, but Margaret couldn't place where she might have seen him before. When her turn came, Margaret started placing her items on the counter. Zixith's large black eyes looked at her with the kind of expression that said he was already annoyed. His 4 arms moved fast, scanning each item with sharp, beeping sounds. "Total is 47 credits, Zixith said in heavily accented English, his voice making clicking sounds between words. Margaret nodded and reached into her purse. She pulled out the soft cloth and began unwrapping her coins. They were beautiful things made of real silver and copper, with Earth's old symbols stamped on them. Some showed eagles. Others had buildings from old America. Each coin caught the light differently as she counted them out. Zixith's eyes grew wider as he watched her count. "What are those?" he asked, his voice getting louder. "My payment," Margaret said quietly, focused on counting. 47 credits. "Those are coins," Zixith said, now speaking loud enough that other customers started looking. "Physical coins. We don't take those primitive things here." Margaret looked up, confused. "But they're legal credits. The same value as your chips." "Legal maybe, but not here." Zixith clicked his fingers in what Margaret had learned was a sign of disgust among his people. "This is a modern market. We don't have time for your human museum pieces." The Veltar in line behind the quiet human man started clicking too, the sound spreading like laughter. A group of Pixians floating nearby began making high-pitched sounds that served as their version of giggles. Even some of the other humans in the market turned to stare, their faces showing embarrassment. Margaret's hands began to shake as she tried to count faster. Some of the coins slipped from her fingers and rolled across the counter. The sound of metal hitting metal seemed very loud in the suddenly quiet space around her checkout station. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These are good money. My husband earned every one of them." Zixith made a loud clicking sound and turned to call toward the security station. "We need help here. Customer is being difficult." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. In all her years on the station, she had never caused trouble. She kept to herself, paid her bills, followed all the rules, Now this young alien was treating her like she was some kind of criminal just for using the money her dead husband had left her. The quiet human behind her stepped forward slightly. Margaret could feel his presence, solid and calm, even though he didn't say anything yet. His dark eyes were fixed on Zixith with an expression that was hard to read. "There's no need for security," the man said, his voice quiet but clear. "The lady is just paying for her groceries." Zixith's forearms stopped moving. He looked at the human man with surprise. It was rare for humans to speak up in situations like this, especially when other aliens were watching. "She's using old coins," Zixith said, as if this explained everything. "Primitive payment, it slows down the line." "How long have you worked here?" the man asked. 6 months, Zixith answered, clearly puzzled by the question. "And in those 6 months, how many customers have you seen pay with coins?" "None." "Because it's stupid." The man nodded slowly. "So you're saying that in 6 months of working here you've never bothered to learn that coins are legal tender throughout the Centauri system?" Zixith's blue skin seemed to get darker. Around them, the market was getting quieter as more people stopped to watch. The Pixians had stopped their giggling. Even the big Kronak warriors were turning to see what was happening. Margaret stood very still, her coins scattered on the counter. She had never had anyone stand up for her like this, especially not a stranger. The man's voice stayed calm and polite, but there was something underneath it that made even Zixith pause. "The law says you have to accept any legal form of payment," the man continued. "And these coins are not just legal. They're probably worth more than the digital credits in your system because they're made of real metal." Security was walking over now, 2 large Kronak guards with their hands resting on their weapon belts. Margaret felt her heart beating faster. She had never been in trouble with station security before. What if they arrested her? What if they made her leave the station? The quiet human turned slightly and looked at her with kind eyes. "It's going to be okay," he said softly, just for her to hear. Margaret didn't know who he was or why he was helping her, but something in his voice made her believe him. The 2 Kronak security guards were getting closer, their heavy boots making loud sounds on the metal floor. Each guard was almost 8 feet tall, with thick gray skin and muscles that looked like they could bend steel bars. Their black uniforms had the station security badge, and their hands stayed near their stun weapons. Margaret felt her whole body shaking now. She had never been in trouble before. Never had security called on her. The coins on the counter seemed to mock her, scattered and useless. She started to reach for them, thinking maybe she should just leave and go hungry this week. The quiet human man placed his hand gently on her shoulder. His touch was warm and steady, and somehow it made her feel less afraid. "Don't move the coins," he said softly to her. Then he turned to face the approaching guards. "Officers," he said in a clear, calm voice, "there seems to be a misunderstanding here." The first guard, whose name tag read Grok, stopped a few feet away. His small eyes looked from Margaret to the coins to Zixith behind the counter. "Cashier called for help," Grok said in broken English. "Customer making trouble." "What kind of trouble?" the man asked. Zixith clicked his fingers rapidly and spoke. She's trying to pay with old coins, real metal coins. It's not normal. It holds up my line." The second guard, smaller than Grok but still huge compared to the humans, looked at the coins on the counter. "Those are credits," he said, sounding confused. "I can see the numbers." "Yes, but they're physical," Zixith said, getting more excited. "Nobody uses physical money anymore. It's primitive. It's embarrassing." The quiet man stepped forward slightly. When he spoke, his voice was still calm, but everyone could hear him clearly. "Officer Grok, what does station law say about legal payment methods?" Grok's face scrunched up as he thought. Station law was complicated, and English wasn't his first language. "Legal credits. All legal credits must be accepted," he said slowly. "That's right," the man said. "And are these legal credits?" Grok looked at the coins again. He picked one up and held it close to his small eyes. The coin was heavy and had clear markings showing it was worth 1 credit. "Yes," he said. "Legal." "Then there's no problem," the man said. The lady is paying with legal money. The cashier has to accept it. Zixith made an angry clicking sound. But it's inconvenient. It's slow. Other customers are waiting. The man turned around and looked at the people in line behind them. There were 3 aliens and 2 humans, all watching the scene with interest. Is anyone here in a hurry? He asked. One of the Pixians floated forward. Actually, this is quite interesting, she said in a high musical voice. I've never seen physical money before. A tall Veltar customer nodded. I've heard about coins, but never seen them used. Are they really made of real metal? Margaret looked up in surprise. The other customers weren't angry about waiting. They seemed curious. The man smiled slightly and turned back to Zixith. Your customers don't mind waiting. So what's really the problem here? Zixith's blue skin was getting darker, which Margaret had learned meant he was either angry or embarrassed. It's just wrong, he said. Why would anyone use old things when we have new things that work better? That's an interesting question, the man said. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a credit chip, the kind most people used. This chip is convenient, yes. But what happens if the computer system goes down? It doesn't go down, Zixith said. But what if it did? What if there was a power failure or a system crash or someone hacked into the network? Zixith didn't answer, but his clicking slowed down. These coins, the man said, picking up one of Margaret's scattered credits, don't need computers. They don't need power. They don't need networks. They work because people agree they have value. That's not primitive. That's reliable. Grok, the security guard, nodded slowly. My home planet, we had system crash last year. Nobody could buy food for 3 days. Old coins would have worked. The man held up Margaret's coin so everyone could see it. But there's something else, something more important than convenience or reliability. He looked directly at Zixith. This coin represents work, real work. Margaret's husband earned this coin by mining asteroids. Do you know how dangerous that is? Zixith shook his head. Asteroid mining is one of the most dangerous jobs in space. You're alone in a tiny ship, drilling into rocks that could explode or break apart at any moment. One mistake and you're dead. Margaret's husband did that work so he could take care of his wife. The man's voice got softer, but somehow that made it more powerful. Every coin here represents hours of his life. His sweat, his fear, his love for his family. When you refuse to accept these coins, you're not just refusing money. You're refusing to honor his sacrifice. Margaret felt tears starting in her eyes. Nobody had ever talked about Ben like that before. Nobody had understood what those coins really meant. The Pixian customer floated closer to look at the coins. They're beautiful, she said. Look at the patterns, and they feel warm. That's because they're real, the man said. Real metal, real work, real value. Digital credits are just numbers in a computer. These are pieces of human history. One of the human customers in line spoke up. My grandfather had coins like these, from old Earth. I wish I still had them. Zixith looked around at all the faces watching him. The security guards weren't on his side anymore. The customers weren't complaining about the wait. Even other Veltar in the market had stopped to listen. I didn't know, Zixith said quietly. Now you do, the man said. So the question is, what are you going to do about it? Zixith looked at Margaret, who was still standing quietly beside her scattered coins. Her hands had stopped shaking, and she was looking at him with something that wasn't anger or fear, but sadness. I'm sorry, Zixith said to her. I didn't understand. I thought you were just being difficult. Margaret smiled slightly. It's okay. Not many people understand about the coins. Zixith began carefully picking up the coins from the counter. He counted them slowly, holding each one for a moment before adding it to the pile. 47 credits, he said. Exact amount. He processed the payment and handed Margaret her receipt. Thank you for shopping with us, he said, and for the first time he sounded like he meant it. The crowd that had gathered began to break up, but many people were still talking about what they had seen. The Pixian customer asked Margaret if she could look at the coins more closely. One of the Kronak guards asked where he could learn more about human history. As Margaret packed her groceries, she realized something had changed. Not just for her, but for everyone who had watched. They had all learned something today about respect, about value, about what it meant to honor someone's work and sacrifice. The quiet man who had stood up for her was getting ready to leave. Margaret caught his arm gently. "Thank you," she said. "I don't even know your name." He smiled. "John," he said. "And you don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same thing." But Margaret knew that wasn't true. Most people would have looked away, would have pretended not to see. John had chosen to stand up, to speak out, to make others understand. As he walked away, Margaret noticed other people in the market looking at him with recognition in their eyes. Someone whispered something about movies and Earth, but Margaret didn't catch the words. It didn't matter who he was, she thought. What mattered was what he had done. As Margaret walked away from the checkout counter with her groceries, she noticed that people in the market were still talking. Small groups had formed around the area, and she could hear bits of conversation in different languages. The Pixians were making their musical sounds. The Veltar were clicking softly, and the humans were speaking in excited whispers. John was walking slowly toward the market exit when a young human woman approached him. She had short red hair and wore the uniform of a station maintenance worker. "Excuse me," she said, her voice nervous but excited. Are you John Constantine?" John paused and looked at her with a small smile. "Yes, I am." The woman's eyes got wide. "Oh my God, I loved your movie about the colony ship, and the one where you played the detective on Mars. What are you doing here on Kepler Station?" Before John could answer, more people had heard the conversation. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered around him. Margaret stopped walking and turned to watch, curious about who this man really was. "John Constantine is here?" said a Veltar merchant speaking in perfect English. "The actor from Earth? I have seen his films. Very good stories about humans." A Kronak warrior pushed through. The crowd. "You played soldier in Battle for Titan. Good fighting scenes, very realistic." Margaret felt her mouth open in surprise. John Constantine. She had heard that name before, had even seen some of his movies years ago. He was famous throughout human space, and apparently even the aliens knew who he was. But as the crowd grew larger, Margaret realized something else. People weren't just excited about meeting a famous actor. They were talking about what had just happened at the checkout counter. "He stood up for the old human lady," said a Pixian floating above the crowd. "Made the cashier understand about the coins." "Is it true that physical money represents human work?" asked a young Veltar. The way he explained it made sense. John looked around at all the faces watching him. He seemed uncomfortable with the attention, but Margaret could see that he understood something important was happening. "Can I ask you all something?" John said, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "How many of you have ever thought about where your money comes from?" The question seemed to confuse people. A Kronak warrior raised his hand. "Credits come from work. We get paid." "Right," John said. "But what does that work mean? What does it represent?" An older human man pushed forward. Margaret recognized him as Pete, who ran a small repair shop near her apartment. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about old Earth," Pete said. "Back when people used paper money and coins. He said every dollar had to be earned with sweat." John nodded. "That's exactly right. And that's what Margaret's coins represent. Not just money, but the meaning behind the money." Margaret felt her cheeks get warm as everyone looked at her. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. "Tell them about your husband," John said gently to her. "Tell them about Ben." Margaret looked around at all the faces watching her. Aliens and humans all waiting to hear her story. She had never talked about Ben to strangers before, but something about this moment felt right. "Ben worked in the asteroid belt for 30 years, she said, her voice quiet but clear. "He would go out in a small mining ship for months at a time. The work was dangerous, ships got lost, people died. The crowd had gotten very quiet. Even the background noise of the market seemed softer. Every time he came home, he would give me coins like these. Margaret continued, pulling one from her purse. He said paper money and credit chips could disappear if computers broke down. But coins were real, solid. They would always have value. She looked at the coin in her hand. Ben died 5 years ago. Heart attack while he was working on an asteroid. His crew brought his body home and they brought me his last paycheck, all in coins just like he wanted. A young Veltar in the crowd made a soft clicking sound that Margaret had learned meant sympathy. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of, the alien said. Yes, Margaret said. Every coin he earned was for me, for us, for our future together. John stepped closer to Margaret. And that's what some people don't understand. When we use physical money, we're not being old-fashioned or difficult. We're honoring the work that went into earning it. An older Pixian floated down closer to the group. On my world, we used to trade in crystals that had to be grown over many years. Each crystal represented time and patience. But we switched to digital credits because it was easier. Maybe we lost something important. My people used carved stones, said a Kronak warrior. Each stone told the story of the work that earned it. Warriors would trade stones that showed their battles. Farmers would trade stones that showed their harvests. The stones carried meaning. John looked around the growing crowd. Every species here probably had something like that once. Physical tokens that meant more than just buying power. They connected us to our work, to our communities, to our values. Pete, the repair shop owner, raised his hand. So what happened? Why did we all stop using them? Progress, said a well-dressed human businessman who had joined the crowd. Digital credits are faster, cleaner, more efficient. You can't lose them or have them stolen. But you can lose the meaning, John said. When money becomes just numbers on a screen, we forget that it represents real human effort, real sacrifice. Margaret looked around at all the faces listening to John speak. Something was changing in their expressions. The aliens who had been laughing at her coins earlier now looked thoughtful. The humans seemed to be remembering things they had forgotten. I think, said the older Pixian, that we should learn more about this. About the old ways of different species. Yes, agreed a Veltar merchant. Perhaps there is wisdom in keeping some old traditions alive. Zixeth, the cashier who had refused Margaret's coins, had left his counter and pushed through. The crowd, his blue skin looked lighter now, less angry. I want to apologize again, he said to Margaret, not just for refusing your payment, but for not understanding what it meant. On my world, we used to trade in memory crystals. Each crystal held the thoughts and experiences of the person who made it. When we switched to credits, we lost that connection to each other. Margaret smiled at him. It's all right. Now you understand. John looked around at the crowd, which had grown to nearly 50 beings of different species. What if we didn't have to choose between old and new? What if we could keep the efficiency of modern systems while remembering the meaning of the old ones? How would that work? Asked Pete. Education, John said. Sharing stories, learning about each other's traditions, making sure the younger generation understands where they came from. A young human girl who had been listening with her parents raised her hand. My teacher at school told us that coins were just old junk that got replaced by better technology. John knelt down to her level. Your teacher wasn't wrong about the technology being better. But sometimes when we get better tools, we forget the important lessons the old tools taught us. Coins taught us that money represents work, that every credit has to be earned. That's a lesson worth remembering. The girl nodded seriously. Can I see one of the coins? Margaret smiled and handed her one of Ben's coins. The girl held it carefully, feeling its weight. It's heavy, the girl said. Heavier than I thought money would be. That's because it carries the weight of the work that earned it, Margaret said. As the crowd began to break up, Margaret realized that something important had happened. What started as a simple trip to buy groceries had become something much bigger. People were talking about values, about work, about respecting different ways of doing things, and it all started because one man was willing to stand up for what was right. 3 days after the incident at the market, Margaret was surprised to find a message waiting for her when she got home. The small screen by her door showed that someone from the station's news service wanted to interview her. She had never been on the news before and wasn't sure she wanted to start now. But the reporter, a young human woman named Lisa Park, was kind and respectful when she arrived. She asked Margaret to tell the story of what happened and to explain what the coins meant to her. "I just wanted to buy groceries," Margaret said, sitting in her small living room with her coins spread on the table between them. "I never thought it would become such a big deal. But it has become a big deal," Lisa said gently. "The video of what happened has been shared all over the station's network. People are talking about it in every sector." Margaret picked up one of Ben's coins, turning it over in her weathered hands. "I suppose people don't see real coins very often anymore." "It's more than that," Lisa said. "People are starting to ask questions about their own traditions, about what they might have lost when everything went digital." After the interview aired that evening, Margaret's door chime didn't stop ringing. Neighbors she had barely spoken to before came by to ask about the coins. Children brought their parents to see the real money from old Earth. Even some of the alien residents of her building stopped by to learn about human customs. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman from down the hall, brought her own treasures to show Margaret. "These are jade pieces my grandmother gave me," she said, opening a small wooden box. "Back on Earth, people used to trade jade for important purchases. Each piece was carved by hand and took months to finish." "They're beautiful," Margaret said, admitting the smooth green stones. "Do you ever use them?" Mrs. Chen shook her head sadly. "No, there's nowhere to use them anymore. But maybe there should be." Meanwhile, across the station, John Constantine was dealing with his own flood of attention. As word spread that a famous actor had stood up for the elderly woman at the market, reporters and citizens alike wanted to hear his thoughts on tradition and progress. John found himself in the station manager's office, sitting across from Commander Helen Ross, a stern woman who ran Kepler Station with military precision. "Mr. Constantine," she said, looking at him over her desk, "your little speech at the market has caused quite a stir. I'm getting requests from cultural groups, teachers, even the Galactic Council representatives." "I'm sorry if I caused any problems," John said. "I was just trying to help someone who was being treated unfairly." Commander Ross leaned back in her chair. "You didn't cause problems. You caused something much more complicated. You caused people to think." She turned her computer screen around so John could see it. The screen showed dozens of messages and requests from around the station. "The Veltar Cultural Society wants to organize a presentation about their old trading crystals. The Kronak Warriors Guild is asking for permission to display their ceremonial battle stones. 3 different human groups want to start clubs for collectors of old Earth items." John read through some of the messages. "That sounds like a good thing." "It is," Commander Ross said. "But it's also a big thing. If we're going to do this right, we need to do it properly. We need organization, space, resources." She stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the station's main plaza. "I'm proposing something. A cultural exchange festival. 1 week where different species can share their traditions, their history, their old ways of doing things." John joined her at the window. Below them, the plaza was busy with the usual mix of species going about their daily business. "You want me to help organize it?" "I want you to be the face of it," Commander Ross said. "People trust you now. They saw you stand up for what's right. If you endorse this festival, it will succeed." That evening, John found himself back at the Central Market. Not shopping this time, but observing. Word of the planned festival had already started to spread, and he could see changes happening around him. At the checkout counters, he noticed that Zixith had put up a small sign that read, "All forms of legal payment accepted with respect." The young Veltar was talking patiently with customers, and John saw him examining a small collection of different coins that people had brought to show him. Near the market's entrance, an elderly Kronak warrior named Gorth had set up a small display. He was showing interested visitors some of the carved stones his people used to trade. explaining the symbols that marked different types of work and achievement. "This stone shows farming," Gorth said in his deep, rumbling voice, holding up a gray rock with simple but elegant carvings. "My grandfather earned this by growing food for our village for 10 seasons." A group of children, both human and alien, listened with wide eyes as Gorth explained how each stone told a story. John walked over to where Margaret was standing near a small crowd that had gathered around a Pixian elder named Harmony. The elderly, Pixian was floating just above eye level, her wings making soft music as she spoke. "Our people used to sing our payments," Harmony was saying, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Each song was unique, created by the person who earned the money. When you paid for something, you gave the merchant not just credits but a piece of your soul expressed in music. "Can you sing one?" asked a young human boy. Harmony's wings began to glow softly, and she sang a short, beautiful melody that seemed to make the air itself shimmer. When she finished, everyone stood in amazed silence. "That was the song my great-grandmother sang when she bought her first home," Harmony said. "It tells the story of her work, her dreams, her hopes for the future." Margaret wiped tears from her eyes. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." John stepped forward. "This is exactly what we need to preserve," he said to the gathered crowd. "These stories, these traditions, these connections to our past." Over the next few days, the plaza began to transform. Commander Ross had approved the festival, and construction crews were building small booths and stages where different species could share their cultures. The festival would last for 1 week, with each day dedicated to different aspects of tradition. John worked with a team of volunteers to organize the events. They planned demonstrations of old crafts, storytelling sessions, music and art displays, and even recreations of ancient marketplaces where people could try trading the old ways. Margaret found herself appointed as the coordinator for human traditions. It was a role she had never expected, but one that filled her with purpose. She worked with other humans on the station to gather examples of old Earth customs, from coin collecting to traditional crafts. Pete, the repair shop owner, brought tools that his grandfather had used to work with his hands. Mrs. Chen shared her knowledge of jade carving. Other humans contributed recipes, songs, stories, and artifacts that connected them to their roots. But the festival wasn't just about looking backward. John insisted that each presentation should also explain how old wisdom could be applied to modern life. "We're not trying to go back to the past," he explained at a planning meeting. "We're trying to take the best parts of the past with us into the future." Dr. Sarah Kim, a human anthropologist who worked on the station, raised her hand. "I think what we're really doing is redefining what progress means. Usually we think progress means replacing old things with new things. But maybe real progress means improving while keeping the valuable parts of what came before." A young Veltar student named Zeph clicked his agreement. "On my world we have a saying, 'The tree that forgets its roots cannot grow strong branches.'" As the festival preparations continued, John noticed something remarkable happening. People from different species were not just sharing their own traditions but learning from each other. Humans were asking about Veltar meditation crystals. Pixians were interested in Kronak honor codes. Kronak warriors were fascinated by human storytelling. The morning before the festival was set to begin, John stood in the plaza looking at all the booths and stages that had been built. Commander Ross joined him, holding a cup of coffee and looking satisfied. "You know," she said, "I've been running this station for 8 years. I've seen a lot of species come and go, trade and argue and live together, but I've never seen them really understand each other like this." John nodded. "Sometimes it takes something small to make people realize what's important. Margaret just wanted to buy groceries with her husband's coins, but she ended up teaching all of us something about respect and value. Are you ready for tomorrow?" Commander Ross asked. John looked around at the booths representing dozens of different worlds and cultures, all brought together by a simple act of standing up for what was right. "I think we all are," he said. The first day of the Cultural Exchange Festival was unlike anything Kepler Station had ever seen. The main plaza was filled with beings from dozens of different worlds, all eager to share and learn about each other's traditions. Margaret stood at the human booth wearing her best dress and feeling more nervous than she had in years. "Are you ready for this?" asked Pete, who was helping her organize the display of Earth artifacts. Margaret looked out at the crowd gathering around their booth. "I never thought anyone would be interested in my old coins," she said. "Now look at all these people." John appeared beside them, carrying a microphone and looking calm despite the chaos around him. "The opening ceremony starts in 10 minutes, he said. "Commander Ross wants to say a few words, then I'll introduce you to speak about the coins." "Me? Speak to all these people?" Margaret felt her stomach tighten. "I don't know what to say." "Just tell them what you told us," John said gently. "Tell them about Ben, about the work the coins represent, about why they matter to you." When the time came, Margaret found herself standing on a small stage in front of hundreds of faces. Humans, Veltar, Kronak, Pixians, and species she didn't even recognize, all looked up at her expectantly. "My name is Margaret Sullivan," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "A week ago I just wanted to buy groceries. I had no idea that my husband's coins would start all this." She held up one of Ben's coins so everyone could see it. "This coin represents 30 years of my husband's life, 30 years of dangerous work in the asteroid belt, mining the materials that built stations like this one." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. "When I use these coins, I'm not being difficult or old-fashioned. I'm honoring his memory. I'm remembering that everything we have, everything we build, comes from someone's hard work." She paused, looking out at all the faces watching her. "I hope that today and for the rest of this festival, we can all remember to honor the work that came before us. Whether it's human coins or Veltar crystals, or Kronak stones, or Pixian songs. They all represent the same thing, people caring, enough to create something of value." The applause that followed was thunderous. Margaret had never heard such a sound, and it made her feel proud and humble at the same time. Over the next several days, the festival grew beyond anything the organizers had planned. Word spread through the galactic communication networks, and ships began arriving at Kepler Station specifically to attend the cultural exchange. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a cultural anthropologist from the University of New Terra, arrived on the third day. She found Margaret at the human booth, now surrounded by a permanent crowd of visitors who wanted to see the famous coins. "Mrs. Sullivan," Dr. Vasquez said, introducing herself. "I flew here as soon as I heard about what you've started. This is the most significant cultural event I've seen in 20 years of studying interspecies relations." Margaret looked confused. "I didn't start anything. I just tried to pay for groceries." "You started a conversation," Dr. Vasquez said. "And conversations change the world. I'd like to ask your permission to document this festival for the Galactic Cultural Council. This could influence policy across dozens of worlds." While Margaret was becoming an unexpected academic celebrity, John found himself dealing with requests from across human space. The video of him standing up for Margaret had been transmitted to Earth and the colonies, sparking similar conversations about tradition and respect in human communities everywhere. Captain Maria Santos of the merchant vessel New Hope contacted him from the Tautiti system. "Mr. Constantine, we heard about what happened on Kepler Station. Our crew wants to start carrying some physical currencies again to honor the old ways. Can you help us understand how to do this respectfully?" Similar messages came from colony, worlds, space stations, and even corporate headquarters. People wanted to know how they could bring meaning back to their economic exchanges while keeping the efficiency of modern systems. John worked with Dr. Kim and Commander Ross to create guidelines for what they started calling heritage commerce, ways to incorporate traditional payment methods and cultural understanding into modern trade. Meanwhile, the festival continued to grow. The Veltar delegation demonstrated their ancient crystal meditation techniques, showing how they used to embed memories and intentions into their trading crystals. Young Veltar, who had never seen the old ways, watched in fascination as their elders created glowing crystals that held actual thoughts and emotions. Zixith, the cashier who had refused Margaret's coins, had become one of the most enthusiastic students. He spent hours learning about different species' traditional currencies and began collecting examples from festival visitors. "I want to understand all of them," he told Margaret on the fourth day of the festival. "I never want to dismiss something important again just because it seems different." The Kronak warriors set up a demonstration area where they showed how their honor stones were carved. Each stone told the story of a specific achievement or service to the community. Children of all species lined up to try carving their own simple stones, learning that work and achievement deserved to be remembered and celebrated. But perhaps the most moving presentation came from Harmony, the elderly Pixian who had sung her great-grandmother's payment song. She organized a concert where Pixians of all ages performed the old trading songs, each one telling a story of work, dreams, and accomplishment. "Music was our first currency," Harmony explained to the audience. "Before we had credits or coins, we had songs. When someone did good work, the community would create a song to honor it. The song became their payment, not just money, but recognition of their contribution." The concert lasted for 3 hours, with songs about farming, building, teaching, healing, and countless other forms of work. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the plaza. On the 5th day, something unexpected happened. A group of young beings from different species approached John with a proposal. "We want to start an organization," said Amy Watson, a human student. "A group dedicated to preserving and sharing cultural traditions across species. We could call it the Heritage Alliance," suggested Creeth, a young Veltar. "We could visit schools, teach children about the old ways, help communities reconnect with their traditions." John was amazed at their enthusiasm. "What would you do specifically?" "Everything," said Grun, a young Kronak. "Collect oral histories, preserve artifacts, teach traditional crafts, but also find ways to apply old wisdom to new problems." Amy nodded eagerly. "Like Mrs. Sullivan's coins taught us that payment should have meaning, or how the Pixian songs show us that work deserves artistic celebration. These aren't just historical curiosities, they're principles we can use today." As the festival entered its final days, John realized that something much bigger than a cultural exchange was happening. People weren't just learning about the past, they were reimagining the future. Commander Ross showed him the daily reports from around the station. Crime was down. Complaints about service were almost non-existent. People were being more patient, more respectful, more understanding of differences. "It's like the whole station has remembered how to be kind," she said. Just because people started thinking about the value of work and the importance of respect. John thought about Margaret, now surrounded by admirers and scholars, still quietly explaining the meaning of her husband's coins to anyone who would listen. He thought about Zixith, who had gone from dismissive to dedicated. He thought about all the young people who were planning to carry these lessons to other worlds. "Sometimes," he said to Commander Ross, "the smallest actions create the biggest changes." Margaret just wanted to honor her husband's memory, but she ended up teaching the galaxy about dignity. On the final evening of the festival, as John prepared to leave Kepler Station, he realized that what had started as a simple act of standing up for someone being treated unfairly had grown into something that would outlast all of them. The ripples were spreading outward, carrying the message that tradition and progress could work together, that respect was universal, and that every person's work, no matter how small, deserved to be honored. It was, John thought, exactly the kind of lesson the galaxy needed to learn. Captain Lisa Martinez stood in front of her small mirror, staring at the golden invitation in her hand. The fancy paper felt strange between her fingers. She had read it 10 times already, but the words still seemed impossible. "You are cordially invited to the annual Terra Prime Charity Gala aboard Luna Station." Lisa shook her head and placed the invitation on her desk. Her small quarters on the military station felt even smaller now. The walls were covered with pictures of her crew and maps of the outer colonies. This was her world, not fancy parties with rich people. She picked up the invitation again. The gala was in 3 days. It would raise money for the new colonies, on the edge of human space. Those colonies needed help: food, medicine, Building supplies. Lisa had visited many of them during her missions. She had seen families living in basic shelters, working hard to build new lives on distant worlds. The door chimed. "Come in," Lisa called out. Her friend Captain Danny Rivera walked in. He was holding a cup of coffee and grinning. "So you going to this fancy party or what?" Lisa held up the invitation. "I don't know why they invited me. I'm not rich. I don't wear fancy dresses or know which fork to use for salad." Danny sat down on her small couch. "Maybe that's exactly why they invited you. You've been to more colony worlds than anyone. You know what they need." Lisa thought about this. She had grown up on Freight Station 7. Her father moved cargo between planets. Her mother fixed broken ships. They never had much money, but they worked hard. Lisa learned to pilot ships by watching her father. She joined the military because she wanted to help people. "The colonies do need help," she said quietly. "Exactly. And who better to speak for them than you?" Lisa walked to her closet. She pushed aside her work uniforms and found her dress uniform. It was clean and pressed but simple, not like the expensive gowns the rich women would wear. "I'll look out of place," she said. Danny laughed. "Lisa, you commanded 3 ships during the New Geneva evacuation. You saved 8,000 people. You think some fancy ladies in pretty dresses are scarier than Arcturus pirates?" Lisa smiled a little. The New Geneva evacuation had been difficult. A solar storm was coming, and they had to move everyone off the planet fast. Lisa had worked for 36 hours straight, organizing the ships and making sure every person got to safety. "That was different," she said. "I knew what I was doing then. You know what you're doing now, too. You're representing the colonies, the people who work hard and take risks to build something new." Lisa nodded slowly. Danny was right. She had a job to do. 3 days later, Lisa stood in the docking bay of Luna Station. The station was huge and beautiful. Crystal windows showed the Earth spinning below. Expensive shops lined the main corridors. Everything was clean and shiny. Lisa adjusted her dress uniform. She had polished her metals until they gleamed. Her boots were perfectly clean. She looked like a soldier, and she was proud of that. Other guests walked past her toward the main ballroom. The women wore long, flowing dresses that probably cost more than Lisa made in a year. The men wore suits that fit perfectly. They laughed and talked in quiet voices about stocks and investments and vacation homes on different planets. Lisa felt her stomach tighten. She did not belong here. But then she thought about the colonies. She remembered little Jenny Clark on Frontier Station, who had given Lisa a drawing of her family's new farm. She thought about the miners on Asteroid Base 7, who worked dangerous jobs to send money back to Earth. She thought about the scientists on the research stations, trying to find new ways to grow food in space. These people needed help. If Lisa could help them by coming to this party, she would do it. She walked toward the ballroom. The entrance was decorated with flowers from a dozen different worlds. Music played softly. Waiters in white uniforms carried trays of food and drinks. Lisa took a deep breath and stepped inside. The ballroom was enormous. The ceiling was made of clear material that showed the stars outside. Hundreds of people moved around, talking and laughing. Everyone looked comfortable and confident. Lisa found a quiet corner and watched. She recognized some faces from news broadcasts, politicians, business owners, celebrities. These were the people who made decisions that affected millions of lives. Waiter approached with a tray of drinks. Lisa took one and thanked him. The glass was made of real crystal, not the plastic cups she was used to. "Excuse me," said a woman's voice. Lisa turned. 3 women stood nearby. They were all beautiful and well-dressed. Their jewelry sparkled in the light. Their hair was perfect. Their smiles looked practiced. "You must be Captain Martinez," said the first woman. She was tall with blonde hair. "I'm Helena Blackwood. These are my friends Victoria Sterling and Camille Cross." Lisa nodded politely. "Nice to meet you." "We were just wondering," said Victoria, "how exactly did you get an invitation to this event?" The question surprised Lisa. "I'm not sure what you mean." Camille laughed, but it was not a kind laugh. Well, this is usually for people of a certain status. Donors, you know. People who can actually afford to contribute to the cause. Lisa felt her face grow warm. I care about the colonies. I've worked with many of them. Oh, I'm sure you have, said Helena. But caring and belonging are two different things, don't you think? The three women looked at each other and smiled. Lisa realized they were enjoying this. They wanted to make her feel uncomfortable. Your uniform is interesting, said Victoria. Very military, very practical. We were expecting evening gowns, added Camille. But I suppose not everyone understands the dress code. Lisa's hands tightened around her crystal glass. She wanted to leave, but she thought about the colonies again, about the people who needed help. I'm here to support the cause, she said quietly. Of course you are, dear, said Helena. How noble. The three women continued talking, but Lisa stopped listening. She looked around the ballroom and wondered if coming here had been a mistake. Across the room, someone else was watching the conversation with growing anger.